culture, which is something that we don't necessarily talk about often enough. So, as Maruri mentioned, we're going to talk about mistakes. So I think it's better to show what doesn't work so we can reflect into things we can do to make sure that we can avoid those mistakes. And we're going to have a breakout room session in between the sessions so you guys have some time to chat and interact and debrief on some of the activities. Okay, so get ready for that, not just using the chat, but also for that breakout room session. So let's get started. First of all, as Maruri was saying, one of the things we do, I'm the CEO and founder of Fearless Culture. We're a culture design organization consultancy based in the US, but we serve clients across the world. And basically, the point is about helping leaders, teams, and also consultants design culture more effectively, more intentionally. Culture shouldn't be something abstract or hard to grasp when we apply the right model. So also Maruri mentioned, hey, let's do something to keep people excited. We're going to have a book giveaway. Stay tuned, and we're going to unveil what are the things you need to do to be hopefully one of the three awardees. So we're going to share that later in the session. So for today's topic, we talk about culture. We know that culture has become more and more a priority for many leaders, for many CEOs. In the past, we didn't have many research, but now we're seeing a lot of research that ties culture not only to employee well-being, happiness, engagement, you name it, but also to business results. And that's the important piece that we're going to talk today. If you want to scale your business, you need to make sure that the culture helps you get there faster and in a better way. However, I want to start with challenging some thoughts about culture. Culture matters, culture is an amplifier, but without a business strategy, you're not going to get that far. So the first thing I want to tackle is this. You might have seen this plenty of times, not only on LinkedIn, but also on books, and many people quoting this, that culture is strategy for breakfast. And I want to share two things about it. First of all, it's the wrong advice because culture is not more important than strategy. We need both. And without the proper business strategy, culture is not going to get you that far. But most importantly, Peter Drucker never said this, and people keep quoting him. So I want to clarify that for over. I wrote it in a book, and people keep telling and making this because it sounds cool. My suggestion instead, and what I tell my clients is culture and business strategy should have lunch together. They need to become best buddies. They need to build and work along. If you have the right strategy, your culture is going to amplify, it's going to accelerate that, and it's going to help you scale your business faster. What do we mean by scaling culture, right? The immediate thought for many people is, oh, I'm maybe a fast growth business, maybe I'm a startup, getting some funding, growing my business. So, hey, is the culture I define, if I define a culture, going to help me become the kind of company I want? Or maybe having a culture that's attractive to bring new talent, more seasoned executives, to make sure that the VC capital are excited. But we're going to see that scaling applies not only to fast growth companies, but it also applies to companies that are going through different stages in which they need to rethink who they are, how they behave, how they collaborate. So basically, we're talking about evolving principles and behavior so we can thrive in a new context. I'm going to explain what are the different contexts and how this impacts culture. And when we think about scaling, people tend to think about size. We're going to talk about it's not just about increasing or making our culture bigger, but making it better. So that's part of the challenge that we're going to discuss today. So before I jump into it, I want to hear from you. If you could use the chat and let me know why you're here, right? I mean, is it because Marjorie is great and she invited you and said, hey, let's join her? Or is it because this topic in particular basically connects to the line of work that you do, maybe your company, or if you're a consultant or your clients' business are going through these business changes or expansion, maybe geographical expansion, and you need to rethink. So basically, why are you interested in scaling culture? What are the questions you have? What are the challenges you're facing? Use the chat and let us know, please. So
So
see
some,
from Oksana. Yep.
yep, go ahead.
No. If you want to read some,
Yeah.
Maria. Yeah. Yeah.
Sure. So I can help here. So
Yeah.
Oksana is saying culture is important because it's about the way you treat your talent, and that's the only competitive advantage that organizations have. And it's not enough for CEOs to focus on it. It can't be an afterthought. Great. I think that's perfect. Spot on, Oksana. Jenny, I'm here because we are scaling our business through franchising and we need to know about how to keep our culture strong. Yes, Renata is rapid growth and managing the hybrid model with the desire to get more people back into the office. I think this is something that we can all relate to. Christy, I'm responsible for the culture of our Chicago office, and I'd like to expand what our associates are experiencing here to other parts of the company, especially remote employees, including remote employees. Daphne is what you do for work. Yay, a culture geek like me. Sharon, I'm from the CPG agency in St. Louis. Our agency is growing rapidly. We have a strong culture. We want to make sure we don't lose it. Cynthia, going through a fast growing expansion. So I'm going to keep it simple. So largely we're seeing expansions, growth, transformations. Yep, I think that's the large theme of the comments coming in. Startups, yes. So Desiree is talking about being startup in biotech. There are always issues moving from a research phase to development, and I think that's what you're going to touch upon, Gustavo, is different phases. Yeah. So thank you for all.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful challenges, and hopefully we get to connect with some of them. But if not, then in the Q&A we can go deeper into specific, like for example, nonprofit or franchising models and how culture affects those. As I mentioned there, and you already covered most of this, thank you. There are many reasons why a company might be prompted to scale their culture. Sometimes internal factors like going through acquisitions, rapid growth, geographic expansions, maybe change of leadership that they want to maybe shake things up a little bit, or change of business models. You're expanding into new areas or maybe transforming your business model completely. Also, employee feedback, people saying, hey, the culture that we have is not the one we want, or actually there's a gap between the declared culture and how we actually perceive it. And of course, market disruptions, competition, crisis that can come from a PR crisis that we experience, or a pandemic might force a company to revisit and rethink what's their culture. Of course, this could happen two ways. You can be proactive about it. Don't wait until you're facing the dramatic impact between expanding your business model, but then the culture probably is not aligned. So, how you can prevent that? But in many cases, especially when it comes to external factors, we need to react to those, hopefully, quickly and soon enough. We talk about culture, and before we jump into the six mistakes we want to avoid and how to avoid it when scaling culture, it's important to align into, okay, what do we mean by culture? I'm not going to get into definitions. I already mentioned one definition. I don't like that culture eats breakfast for lunch. But what I want to make sure is that we understand what encompasses culture. So we use this model called the culture design canvas that has 10 building blocks. I'm not going to get into details, but most importantly, it encapsulates the three key pillars of culture, what we call the ABCs. So at the core, we have alignment. We want to make sure that alignment is not about sharing the same goals, but it's alignment on who we are, what's our identity, who we want to be as a company. That's the long-term vision. Think of purpose, values, behaviors, priorities. That's critical. When it comes to a scaling culture, this usually doesn't change as much as the other factors. But at some point, and we're going to discuss, you might need to change your purpose, whatever, to make sure you're scaling the culture in the right direction. The B stands for belonging. So that's the glue, the emotional culture, what brings people together, how we make people feel included, how we bring psychological safety, how we practice feedback, what are the team rituals that we have in place. Those often have to change, they have to adapt when you're bringing new talent. Let's say a fast growth startup hiring senior executives from traditional corporations. Well, how are we going to bring those people together? How are we going to integrate the culture that those people are used to operate in with the culture that brought us here? And lastly, the C stands for collaboration. So that's the functional aspect of culture, which is as critical as the other two elements. So how we manage this, how we make decisions, how we manage meetings, not only in real time, but also asynchronously, how we collaborate, and the norms and rules that guide expectations. So those three elements, keep them in mind: alignment, belonging, and collaboration, so we can connect with different mistakes that we're going to review. So the first thing, this might feel obvious, but I would tell you, working with different types of organizations across the globe, I still meet leaders, CEOs, who think that culture is a one-off thing. They say, hey, I have a culture. I define the values. We have this nice PowerPoint. We have a nice website that explains the about section, who we are, and that's about it. They think that culture first is just values. And I just show with this model, culture is much more than simply stating values or behaviors. There are more elements, those alignment, belonging, and collaboration elements. But most importantly, culture evolves. It should evolve. The same that the employee's mindset, the workplace, the context evolves, so should your company culture. But once again, many people haven't revisited their culture for decades. I'm not exaggerating. The amount of people that say, hey, we haven't talked about culture or updated our culture in the past 30 years or so, it's surprising. People are asking about the deck. Yes, we're gonna share the deck afterwards and the recording for sure. So the big thing is confusing that the stated culture equals real culture. So one of the things we do with the canvas I just shared is try to unmap how people experience the real culture, the real experience, not what's declared. And often we find a huge gap between what leaders think their culture is and what it actually is. As you can see, research shows that employees don't really believe in their company culture. They don't trust their values. They don't think that the company delivers on their promises. So they speak about themselves in one way, but the reality doesn't match that uh, um, expression. So, what can we do about it? One thing that's really important is understanding that culture evolves and the organization evolves, and we need to basically, hopefully, proactive or at least reactively address this issue. We can clarify, improve, or eliminate practices. For example, recently Netflix updated their culture deck. We can discuss for hours if it's an improvement, if it's a reaction. That's different. Many people were really uh, frustrated, to say the least, about it. However, the CEO said, you know what? We need to evolve. Our company is evolving, so that's why we have a new version. Now, there are two very interesting elements. People were mad because the freedom and responsibility concept that actually was one of the things that people quote the most about that culture deck was eliminated and replaced by people over process, right? Which is not exactly the same. But most importantly, they clarified something about the keeper's test. So, for those who are not familiar, Netflix has a keeper test in which basically managers can define if some person is a keeper or not. And when they feel that they are not, they immediately sack them without sometimes performance reviews. So, they added something that is about having regular conversations about performance. So they clarified that this is not a surprise because the reality was that it was a surprise. Many people were fired. Even one of the creators of the original Netflix code without much anticipation, so to speak, so without any clue. The other thing about Netflix, for example, is they incorporated a value. This was before this update that speaks about a diversity, and that value per se wasn't because the company really was believing on that or supporting that, but was more because of legal advice to prevent lawsuits, right? So not all improvements are necessarily for better. So that's we're not here to judge companies. They're all very complex. They all have good sides and downsides. But the most important thing is how can we acknowledge, like Netflix CEO, that the company culture evolves, so should their principles, but also there are things that were in place that were driving behaviors that were not great, like people being fired without any kind of a previous performance conversation, and now this has been codified to make sure that doesn't happen. The second mistake is shifting from freedom to prescription. This happens in many companies, but especially when it comes to fast growth startups, maybe companies that are getting into a franchising model, maybe companies that used to be run by family members and they become either public or they change from one generation to the other. So there was a huge sense of trust. People were given a lot of freedom to make decisions, and all of a sudden, you start seeing lots of rules, more control, trying to basically prevent of trying to fix issues from happening. The thing about rules is many times leaders think that, hey, someone, for example, hybrid work, people are not working as hard as they should, or they are working around the system, so we're going to punish everyone because of one or two offenders. Instead of having a conversation with the offenders, we end punishing the people that are acting out of good faith. Rules don't fix the problems and actually create more problems that end to be more expensive. For example, Fabi, it's a French metallurgical a company that builds parts for cars. And the CEO realized at some point when he was working around the factory that the cost of a pair of new gloves for an operator was much more expensive than the CFO realized. If you ask the CFO, he would say, hey, maybe three, four, now with inflation, €4 per pair, that was the cost. However, every time someone, an operator, had to replace their damaged gloves, they need to go to their supervisor, they need to get a ticket, they need to get a signature, then they have to leave the space and go to another location within the manufacturing facility and get the new pair, show the damaged pair of gloves, show the ticket, and so on and so forth. All in, at least 1 or 2 hours were lost of productivity. So that cost the company thousands of euros because people weren't operating. So the company was trying to prevent people from stealing a €3 or €4 thing, but it actually, by doing that, it ended costing much more. Even worse, the CEO realized that people were annoyed because they thought that they were treated like thieves. Okay, so they're controlling us because they think they are not trustworthy. So this is a point about rules. Rules are meant to prevent the company, to protect the company, but many times they end harming the culture because of the messages they send. So when it comes to scaling culture, we need to focus more on the principles. What are the kind of principles that we need to scale to make sure we are consistent and people practice and bring to life those positive behaviors? So Ritz-Carlton has gone through a huge expansion throughout the past decade, but still they were able to continue to embed the leadership principles into their culture. They staff is not like ladies and gentlemen, right? It's a very high-end hotel chain, so they provide a high-quality service. People, these ladies and gentlemen, are provided with a 2,000, let's say, check or bonus for them to decide if there's an issue, if something's happening, if someone's not happy, they can spend that money on the company dime to make sure they resolve any issue without any approval. They don't need to talk to a manager, they don't need to talk to anyone. Why? Because the company trusts that people are going to do the right thing. And this approach, scaling those principles, has helped them continue to have this strong culture and a strong culture, a customer satisfaction. Another thing that's important is when we start to grow, leaders feel that people are not going to have the same criteria that they have when it comes to making decisions or doing the right thing, right? So that's why there's more control. However, control is going to teach people to do the right thing. It's only going to be dependent if managers can spend time with people, if we have a lot of rules with all the consequences I already explained. So better it's to set what's the criteria, right? So a criteria that people can use every time they're facing strategic or more day-to-day decisions so they can follow that criteria that's aligned with the company principles. So one thing we do is like create a what we call even overstatements. So when two things, when push comes to shove, and we need to choose between one good thing and another good thing, which one comes first? This will gonna help people like make decisions without having to be supervised or to be or to have a rule that tells them do this, don't do that. For example, Amazon prioritizes long-term value creation even over short-term results. It prioritizes speed even over perfection. It doesn't mean that Amazon doesn't want to do the right thing, or but it means that being first to market matters the most. So they're not willing to sacrifice speed just to make everything right. So when they have 80% of the information, people can make a decision, go ahead and implement because they're going to figure out the rest while implementing. And lastly, high performance even over harmony. We know Amazon is a really high performing, very aggressive culture. We can say if harmony really is something that they value or something good for them, but that's a separate conversation, right? So establishing these criteria that many companies have done basically helps them clarify, and everyone across the company as you scale knows exactly what matters and what they need to prioritize. Okay,
Gustavo,
so let's do.
there's
Sure.
a question here. It's probably an observation. If you go back to those statements, to me, they seem that they're inherently require a lot of courage to establish and then work with these priorities. Is that your experience as well? That these are more successful in more courageous organizations with more courageous leaders?
I would say that leadership without courage is not leader.
What's the problem if you don't have courageous leaders? Yeah,
Yeah. Okay, so now I want you guys to get into a small group discussion and think about your organization. Probably you never went through this exercise, so I'm not trying to for you to settle on what it should be, but at least start thinking about where are two things that really, really matter. For example, people say, "Hey, we're people first, we're innovation first, we are profit first, we're shareholder. What really matters?" So create a list of all things that are really important to your organization and try to create when push comes to shove, what comes first. So this even over that. Okay? And discuss it with your colleagues. We're going to give you 5, 6 minutes, Madhuri.
yep. So
Okay, cool.
I will go ahead and open the rooms. There are about, I think, 4 to 5 folks in each room. Uh, let's see if I got everyone. Anyone without a room?
Is this the room?
No, I'm assigning you.
Okay.
All right. I noticed that you're not assigned. Okay. There you go. All right. I think I got everyone. Now, Sonali, here you go. Still need a room soon?
Did you post the recording, Madhuri?
Let me pause.
Welcome back. So we're going to ask you if you landed anywhere, even if it was a first attempt, if you could share in the chat what happened there, maybe if you land in any even overstatement that you think should apply to your company, or maybe some insights from that conversation, because this is not an easy exercise to do. So please use the chat and let us know what you uncovered. progress over perfection, prioritizing collaboration over efficiency, having franchise owners feeling supported over corporate profitability.
Mm.
Good. Customers and profit first. Someone saying that it was a great exercise. They would like to walk their team through it. Please do it. Sustainable solutions even over short-term margin goals. Patient experience even over profitability. Speed in decision-making even over group consensus. Fantastic. Importance of operationalization of culture. System might, well, I lost that. Must support the stated culture goals. Fantastic. Great. So once again, this is not a definite answer. We're not looking for the solution, but just to get you in the mood of what it happens when you create this set of even over statements. It's easy to scale what matters to the company because people know when they have to make day-to-day or more strategic decisions where they need to focus their energy, and you need to write rules or control them to make sure that that happens. So the moving on, the third mistake has to do when I mentioned alignment, like the key core of culture, no purpose, values. So when people sacrifice their identity simply because they want to grow, and we can have a huge debate about if this is good or not. I'm not here to tell you how to run your business, but it's at least a red flag that in many cases, because we pursue growth as the main topic, as the main goal, we end losing most of our company identity, our culture, why actually we started a business or why people decided to join us, our customers, our employees in the first place. So we use a model about types of culture that basically speaks to two axes. What companies that are more people-centric, companies that are more business-centric. So I talk about Amazon or Netflix. They're very aggressive companies. They focus on results. They talk about people, but they don't care about people that much, right? As I mentioned, many their careers are not a priority, but actually making sure the company performs and does well. On their hand, we have companies that are more tribal, more people oriented, people first, that focalizes more of the energy. So there are people even over profit, like let's think about many CPG organizations or SAPOS and so on and so forth, right? The point is, if we're not clear about this, what happens is we might lose our identity, what brought us where we are as we continue to expand our business. So we see a lot of startups that start like fearless, very innovative, very experimental, but as they grow, they want to put more process in place. There's nothing wrong with that. The point is, if you put too much process, then you might end building a more fearful, more controlling, more top-down environment that actually is going to limit innovation, but actually many of the people that join your company because of that entrepreneurial, innovative spirit might end leaving. I'm going to skip this. So an example of this is what happened with Etsy. Etsy started in 2005. It was founded by a group of friends. One of them was an amateur, a furniture maker, very linked to storytelling, a very warm person, very human. And he wanted to create a community for people like him who could bring that craft thing to the world and create a community that wasn't like Amazon, that wasn't that other eBay or other kind of e-commerce platform at that point. And the company was doing great. The company even became public, but at some point, the board weren't happy with the leadership and they changed the leadership. So a lot of things happened because of that. Not only they changed the leadership, but a lot of people starting to leave the company. Layoffs became the immediate first response to improve margins, and then it became a practice. So every year, the company had never faced layoff before. They're always waiting for that to happen. A lot of people now feel that that emotional culture, that strong sense of belonging is no longer there. Many people left. Etsy used to be a big corp. That's no longer the case. So they lost a lot of that. And now they feel much closer to an Amazon kind of model than to the kind of a community that brought employees and vendors to join them, right? So yeah, the business continued to grow, but at the expense of their identity. So that's a tough thing that we need to consider. We want to keep who we are or simply grow, because in the end, uh, Jenny here is saying, interesting, you feel that as the consumer. Exactly. It ends harming people who buy because you're losing that. And someone, and even maybe the former founder, when their NDA is over, they can start a company again, change the brand, and basically build on those principles. And they're going to steal more of your customers pretty quickly because people connect with the culture, with the brand, not just with your website. Something interesting is like, I don't know if you're familiar with Motley Fool. Basically, it's a firm that advises people, individuals, basically to trade on the stock. And what they do is they're very culture oriented. They're a financial services company, very black and white. It's all about making money. But the way they adopted the culture is really very fun, very engaging. And one of the things they do is they are very critical about who they hire as they continue to grow, to make sure that people that they bring in not only fit into the culture, instead of changing what happened exactly with Etsy, that they brought completely different management and the culture lost its track, but also people that help the company become better. So that's why we call culture fitness. It's not just they fit in, but actually they make it better. They connect to the values, they connect with the principles, but add new things. And one thing that's interesting, they had a set of values, and one of them, it's called Modly, just like the brand. And that means that every employee, when they join the company, they can express what's their Modly. Basically, what are the principles, their personal values that they're bringing to the company. Because the company understands that we have certain shared values that are established, but then every employee brings one more and they make the company richer. So that's exactly what we talk about hiring for culture fitness, growing the identity, not just the business. Moving on, it's tempting. We talk about, many of you talk about franchising when it comes to expanding, and people say, hey, we want to make sure that we keep the same identity. But we need to find the balance between finding a shared culture, but also making sure that those subcultures have room to grow. If you're expanding in different geographies, if you want people to feel like an owner, you cannot tell them everything they need to do to run the business. You need to allow, for example, uh, one thing that, oh my God, I have a blank with one of the book chains, like, oh, I'm going to get back to that.
Which, what product?
A book
A book.
store.
Oh, Barnes
Sorry?
and
Yeah, Barnes
Barnes.
and Nobles. One of
Yeah.
the things they were able to do to basically recover from a really bad 10 years, whatever business, is they started giving store managers the authority and the empowerment typical like a regular bookstore. And each of them managers started to buy and showcase whatever the books that they think their community would really care, versus follow what happens in big chains in which they have agreements with major publishers and they all have the same books. And that had really not only created a sense of community, but helped the chain go back into business. An example of what we don't want to do is like, what's this cup is upside down? It's on purpose. What happened to Starbucks when they entered the Australian market down under, right? The expression, it was a huge collapse. They end closing two-thirds of the stores. They lost like, 100 and something million dollars. It was a disaster. First, because they failed to understand 105 there, the identity of the Australian, the Aussie coffee culture, basically infused or inspired by a lot of Italian and Greek immigrants. They also have their own versions like the flat white and the Australian macchiato. At that time, Starbucks didn't have a flat white, right? So they failed to understand the culture. Australians value social experience, not just, they weren't looking for a fast food approach to coffee. They were still looking for that social experience, and Starbucks failed to understand. So we need to share certain values, but we also need to adapt to the people we're doing business with and the places we are expanding to as well. Eh, One of our clients is Mars, and Mars has learned the lesson. For example, when they acquire Kind, the the snacks brand and franchise, one of the things they realize is they want to keep Kind as a separate unit. It's still interconnected, so it's not independent, it's interdependence. They have support, they leverage all the resources and the technology and operations from Mars, but they have full autonomy in how they behave, how they make decisions, how they innovate, and everything. It feels like a semi-standalone company, and the company has continued to grow. Unlike, for example, a former client of mine that basically bought another snack company and then they basically brought it to the floor because of lack of understanding and respect to the regional culture. So it's important to find that balance when you're expanding. You shouldn't have a very rigid approach to culture. You need to consider those subculture and respect them. Eh, GitLab, which is a development operation a platform, they believe in open software. And one of the things that they believe its culture should be as open as software. And they distribute culture rights. These are play on words. The same way that we distribute decision-making rights, this company does the same with culture. Culture is the CEO main responsibility, but we need to distribute authority for people to make changes, to people to nurture culture. So we don't have a vertical approach to it, but more of a in and out. And GitLab, any employee can suggest changes to the culture deck. Their culture deck is super detailed and extensive. If you don't know it, I would encourage you to check it because they are a remote first company, one of the most successful remote companies. And one of the reasons because they have been very obsessive about all the details, how they collaborate, how they share information, how they communicate, how they manage meetings. Everything's super codified. And any employee can suggest changes to the CEO. So it's not that the CEO controls that. People can provoke and changes are made because of that, because the culture rights are distributed. Then moving on, one of the mistakes has to do with behaviors. We have a lot of things that happens when we are in a, let's say, either growing or an early stage in which our business is doing great, and we start to see some behaviors that are far from perfect, but we dismiss them because maybe they come from a great leader or a high-performing, smart employee, and we say, hey, look to the other side, nothing's going to happen. But as culture scale, as your business scale, so will those bad behaviors. And then it becomes too late to eradicate that spreads like a virus. So we need to make sure that we can anticipate that. We see from research that lots of CEOs and leaders struggle to align their team because of those behavior misalignment. They want to move the company in one direction, but the behaviors don't match. So one of the exercises we do with clients is to try to identify what behaviors do we reward and what behaviors do we punish. And the language for some people feels like, hey, are we talking about school punishment? And the point is, people use terms like encourage or expected. Those are wish list. We're talking about action. When you reward something, you mean that you're going to promote someone, that you're going to hire someone, that you're going to give kudos to someone. You're going to act when people live and bring to life the right behaviors. Similarly, if someone breaks the code, if someone goes against the company norms and someone behaves in a way that's not acceptable, you're going to punish them. And punishment is a metaphor, could be calling people out, having a one-on-one, or at some point getting rid of some people. For example, like at Slack, brilliant jerks are not allowed. So they want to make sure they protect the culture. They don't want just bright people. They also want people that are good people, good team members. And if we don't codify this and we're not aware, then many toxic cultures are cultures that we look to the other side and then one brilliant jerk hired another and then we ended contaminated by lots of them, and it's too late to do something about it. Okay, so I would like to hear from you in the chat. Which behaviors does your company reward and which you punish? Not you should, but actually, where do you draw that line? Where you think that, hey, this is great, we love it, we celebrate, and this is not okay, and this is unacceptable, and we do something when people cross the line. Please share the chat. I want to hear from you guys. We reward people living our 5 values from Jennifer, humility from Marjorie, punish disrespecting coworkers. Is Renata, I have a question, clarifying question. Do you specify what the respect mean, or it's more of a general term?
A general term, but it's part of our core ideologies. So
But people are clear, right? People know exactly what you're talking about.
yes, yeah, and the company they do, yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you. We recently shifted to rewarding thoughtfulness. That's amazing. Thank you. Reward collaboration. We reward trying new things. Reward employees and how they exhibit our core values. Celebrate innovation and creativity. Recognize employees who live our core values. Fantastic. Thank you. An acceptable, rude, and disrespectful behavior. Acceptable thoughtfulness. There's some connecting tissue here, some common themes. Fantastic. That's great. One, and I don't want to jump into details, but just a tip. When you talk about rewarding things like collaboration or innovation, sometimes we need to be a little bit more specific because sometimes people get confused. So what does collaboration really mean? Or innovation? Are we talking that we expect people to come up with a new product or service idea? Or are we talking about day-to-day process or work improvement, right? Sometimes lack of clarity confuses people as well. Punish non-collaborative ways, collaboration on decision-making. Thank you. Fantastic. So you can see this is really important to make sure not only, regardless of which state you are, even if you're already a big organization, it's important to go back and say, hey, do we have clearly codified these behaviors, and make sure as we continue to grow that we don't let them permeate our organization. I already asked this. So one thing that's critical, for example, Microsoft has always been a successful organization. At some point, they stalled, they stopped being innovative, but still they were always been a cash cow. But when the leadership changed, when Satya Nadella took over, he realized that in order to become more innovative, even before AI was a thing, they realized that they need to change the culture. Amazon, Microsoft culture was a know-it-all culture. So everyone was fighting against each other, very aggressive to show who was right. Bill Gates was in part responsible for creating that stuff to basically, there was a lot of competition, internal competition, a lot of individualism, a lot of rewarding individual behaviors rather than promoting collaboration. And at some point, that even feedback was a bad word. So when Satya Nadella came into town, he had to change a lot of things, including removing the word feedback from Microsoft, because people like, oh my God, it was used, it was weaponized, it was used against people, not for the growth purposes, but actually to punish people, take revenge, or whatever purpose. So they install a new approach. It's called perspective. They move from thinking into what have you done, more into what have you learned. They adopted all the growth mindset philosophy into the company. They started basically focusing more in becoming a learn it all culture, right? A different approach, making it okay to ask for help, making it okay to say, I don't know, rather to try to be the smartest person in the room is to be the most curious, the more open-minded person in the room. That shift had helped Microsoft recover part of its mojo and business and a lot of product innovation as well. So lastly, I mentioned this when we talk about merger acquisitions, this when I talk about culture. One big mistake is forgetting that culture is not just about leaders, but it's also about people. Both parties play a key role in defining, shaping, and evolving our culture. So when we don't evolve people, we suffer the consequences. There are many companies that have gone through culture evolutions, culture changes without involving people, and then it backfires because we're making decisions based on assumptions. So one of the best examples is Airbnb. Remember that I mentioned that one of the triggers about a scaling culture is people's feedback. Uh, Airbnb was going through a fast growth period like 5, 6 years ago. And at some point, they realized that people starting complaining, so to speak, about their values. They say, hey, we have too many values. Some of them don't really speak to who we are. They're a little bit confusing. We need to do something about it. So, first of all, Airbnb paid attention. Second, rather than having the leaders or HR or people on culture, people define the new values, they inform that decision using what inflates or deflates our culture, right? We have this tool that the core values that we use based on that experience, which is try to understand where the drivers, what drives people excited about the work they do, being part of Airbnb culture and whatnot. And based on those input, they were able to turn those inflators into the revisited values that were instead of 6 or 7, 4, but they were really much more relevant, much more consistent to what the company stand for, and actually more consistent and more effective for the new stage, the new phase that Airbnb was ready to embark themselves into. So that's a point, and uh, we covered a lot of things. I mean, we have a limited time, so now we're going to open the floor to questions. Of course, this is very high level. Every time we work with companies, we dive too deep into what's driving the culture evolution, what's the need to scale their culture, what are the challenges, and then embark in this. But hopefully, you got some insights to start thinking about your own situation, what to do, what not to do, but also to ask yourself the right questions. And if you want to connect, you can scan this QR code here so you can connect with me on LinkedIn. Also subscribe to my blog and follow I'm publishing at least one article per week on culture and different topics, so you can follow and engage if you want. So once again, scan the code. And in the meantime, if you want to engage, you have any questions, please let me know.
Thank you so much. So many wonderful ideas that I think we can all apply in our different businesses. So thank you.
Sure, thank you.
And I think I wanted to mention this, Gustavo, you have all of these templates that you were talking about for these exercises on your website, right?
Some we have public and some we limit to people that take our programs or our clients. Yeah.
Yeah, but there's a lot that
Yeah.
you share publicly, and that's one
Mhm.
thing about your work is that you are very generous with your tools. So I highly encourage if any of these exercises were sounding like worth doing, it's the website is a great guide, and you can download the templates to work with. And they're all canvases, right? So
Mhm.
I've taken them and blown them up and put them on the wall and done work with post-it notes. They're beautiful. They work really well. They're simple as well. Um, and we have a few minutes. Questions?
What's your favorite piece of advice for rituals or practices that engage remote employees?
Um, First of all, what are you trying to achieve, right? Many times companies come up with rituals that feel completely forced and lack a clear purpose. So that's one thing. And there are things involving people in the development. So we have a tool to help teams develop their own team rituals. Sometimes we have leaders that impose a team ritual or they copy something from other company. Rituals need to be authentic to the company. They need to be connected with the company values as well.
And Christy, were you looking for some rituals other than the normal course of working with remote?
Yeah, I'd say with our on-site employees, there's things that we do, like we have lunch together on Tuesdays and Thursdays, or we have town halls. We do a lot of recognition that's kind of visual in the office, but to do that in a remote setting, it's not like productive time necessarily. So it's hard to know what kinds of things are effective in helping them feel like part of those rituals.
Sure.
This might be
First
the
of
book
all,
for your
yeah,
book.
you need to connect with, so bringing people to the office at least once a quarter and bringing all the teams together, that's something that you cannot beat no matter what are the things that you do. Like you need to create that in-person connection from time to time. Research shows that at least once a quarter, a team needs to get together in person. and to spend time together, not to work, mostly to have fun, to get to know each other, etc. One of the things that we use is not necessarily a ritual, but it's a great tool, is the washing instructions that basically we were taught that we need to treat people like we want to be treated, but actually everyone's different. So the same way that your clothes come with a label that tells you how to treat it, every employee writes their own washing instruction, how they want to be treated. I'm a late owl or an early riser. Do I prefer email or Slack or phone? So there's a lot of things that we do through that tool to connect with people, get to know each other. But it's not just let's get to know each other to have fun, but it improves collaboration because in the end, it's about understanding preferences, personality types, and what people like to do or not, right?
It's a great exercise. I've used it many times. There's a great question about engagement surveys. What do you think from Melissa about engagement surveys?
Wrong person to ask that question. I'm not a fan by any means. First of all, engagement is a term that I would like to retire from our business because people don't talk to their loved ones and say, "Hey, how engaged we are," or friends. That's not language that people use. And I think that for me, the most important thing that we need to measure is a meaningful work. Research shows that the thing that are going to people drive people loyalty is when people are doing work that's meaningful and it's challenging, where they can learn, they can grow, and it's connected to their personal values. When they're doing that, no matter how much you pay, how much eh, perks you offer, whatever, people are going to go somewhere else, right? And I have companies that, for whatever reason, they cannot offer promotions, they cannot give people more money, but then they offer them projects that are really challenging, and people are super happy about that.
Learning and growing is what people
Hmm.
truly want, and they'll compromise on other things.
Hmm.
That's what they are really feel when they're growing. Yeah, I think that totally agree with that 100%. Um, all right, we're at time, so let's not keep anybody here longer than they need to be. So thank you everyone for joining this conversation. Hope you're taking away at least one nugget. And if you are, then it's probably worth the investment of your time. So thank you again.
Absolutely.
And please
Thank you for
DM
joining. Have a good one
and I'll
and
send you.
connect. Bye
Yeah.
bye.
Thank you, Gustavo, so much.
Thank you.
So much.